Welcome to a special edition of Brain Noodles with Ivy Whitlock, your ADHD demisexual polymath. Today we will be talking about the recently released Iron Lung, a movie that was written and directed by YouTube royalty Markiplier, who also starred as the convict. Did you know it was based on a game? I didn't know it was based on a game. And honestly, I'm probably not going to play the game because I kind of prefer my Minecraft and Terraria, but my partner suggested going, and holy banana cans, Batman. Contrary to what passes for reviews on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes, this movie is a force unto itself, deserving of far more than my initial analysis. Very few things move me. This is one. While the episode will run conceptually parallel to the Tug the Noodle section of my usual episodes, it will not be directed by my personal experience. This will be a purely academic analysis of a film that, in my opinion, deserves far more than the consideration it's received thus far. Despite your limited familiarity with my platform, what follows is firmly within my purview. Containment and Dissolution, Dialectical Horror in Iron Lung, written and narrated by I.V. Whitlock. The theoretical framework. Iron Lung operates as more than minimalist horror cinema. It functions as a philosophical experiment staged through extreme perceptual deprivation. This analysis approaches the film through a tripartite framework grounded in 1. Hegelian epistemology, specifically the movement of consciousness outlined in the phenomenology of spirit, from sense certainty toward the collapse of mediated knowledge. 2. Terror management theory, or TMT, which illuminates the affective states of mortality salience and the systematic failure of symbolic defenses. And 3. Cognitive phenomenology, with particular attention to embodiment, perceptual mediation, and predictive cognition under conditions of radical uncertainty. These frameworks are not merely complementary. In Iron Lung, epistemological collapse, cognitive overload, and terror management failure are mutually constitutive processes. The film's philosophical horror emerges precisely at the point where instrumental knowledge continues to function, while meaning, mastery, and subjective stability disintegrate. Crucially, the film stages its inquiry within a structure of nested containment. Blood within the body within the vessel within an ocean of blood, and notably, blood seeping from both the vessel of the body and the vessel in which the body is contained. This configuration is not only spatial, but ontological. Each layer appears to promise separation, protection, and control, yet each is progressively revealed as provisional. The systematic dissolution of these boundaries drives the film's dialectical movement and situates Iron Lung within the logic of hyperobjects. These are phenomena so massively distributed in time and space that they defeat traditional modes of representation. Instrumental mastery and the fantasy of the rational subject. The film opens by positioning its protagonist within a familiar epistemological posture, the rational subject confronting an external environment through technological mediation. This corresponds to the early stages of Hegelian sense certainty, albeit displaced into an instrumental register. Knowledge appears achievable through correct procedure, accurate measurement, and disciplined observation. The vessel's sonar, navigational coordinates, and photographic apparatus all function as prosthetic extensions of human perception, translating an otherwise inaccessible environment into legible, albeit limited, data. This configuration also constitutes a classic terror management strategy. The protagonist's mission, such as it is, provides structure, purpose, and symbolic continuity. Regardless of the circumstances of his arrival here, he has a job, seemingly to incur risk to provide hope for those above. His technical competence operates as a worldview buffer, affirming the fantasy that rational systems can contain existential threat. The vessel itself functions as a materialized denial of vulnerability, a technological membrane interposed between fragile embodiment and annihilating environment. Cognitively, these early moments also establish procedural stability. The protagonist's attention is organized around task execution rather than interpretation, and indeed the moments where he attempts to reclaim power is in performing the tasks. Predictive models, where the vessel is, what comes next, how actions map onto outcomes, these all remain intact, despite the absence of direct perception. Instrumental mediation promises that reality, though unseen, remains knowable through his actions. And yet, this promise already contains a negation. The instruments do not deliver presence. They deliver representations whose adequacy cannot be verified. The photographs are indistinct, the sonar abstract, the data unmoored from lived confirmation. Consciousness is not in contact with the world, but with its own mediated outputs. Mastery, from the outset, rests on faith in representation rather than perceptual grounding. He has to trust, and he says, via restrained accusation, that he must. This is not a flaw, introduced later by the narrative. It is the condition of possibility for the protagonist's initial certainty. The dialectic begins from a compromised position. Antithesis, mediation, hyperobjects, and epistemological vertigo. The film's middle movement foregrounds the consequences of this compromised certainty. The instruments continue to function, but their outputs no longer stabilize understanding. Data accumulates without converging on meaning. The photographs suggest form without identity. Sonar registers movement without orientation. Knowledge becomes inferential rather than confirmatory, a recursive loop of interpretation severed from verification. Here, Iron Lung stages a crisis central to Hegelian epistemology. Consciousness discovers that its supposed access to the object was always mediated, and that mediation does not guarantee truth. Each action depends on prior representations whose correspondence to reality cannot be established. The subject-object distinction, presumed stable, begins to erode in ways that become more visible. The blood ocean asserts itself as a hyperobject, non-local, temporally and spatially distributed, resistant to total apprehension, and knowable only through partial traces. It is not merely vast. It is cognitively ungraspable. The protagonist does not encounter the ocean as an object, but as an enclosing condition that exceeds his perceptual and conceptual capacities. The vessel's instruments become analogous to contemporary digital interfaces, systems that generate continuous data streams without yielding anything that comes close to a holistic understanding. Embodiment becomes increasingly fraught. As Merleau-Ponty emphasizes, knowledge is grounded in bodily orientation and sensory-motor feedback. The vessel negates these foundations. The protagonist cannot see, touch, or spatially orient himself in relation to the environment he inhabits. His body persists as a biological substrate, but is excluded from epistemic participation. The result is not disembodiment, but alienated embodiment, a body present without agency, sensation without orientation. Cognitively, this produces a specific form of distress. Predictive cognition depends on the brain's ability to update models based on environmental feedback. In iron lung, feedback arrives without clear context. Anticipatory systems remain active, but cannot converge on resolution. Anxiety is sustained rather than discharged. The experience within the vessel does not spike and recede. It accumulates. This phase represents the systematic dismantling of mortality buffers. The mission's purpose becomes opaque, then absurd. Technical competence ceases to confer safety. The submarine shifts from protective barrier to potential coffin. Mortality salience intensifies without symbolic compensation. The protagonist is forced to remain cognitively engaged with death awareness, rather than repressing it through memory, meaning, or mastery. As sound and effects penetrate the hull and pressure mounts, the boundary between interior and exterior continues to destabilize. The vessel no longer functions as a secure container, but as a permeable membrane. The distinction between self and environment, central to both epistemology and terror management, begins to collapse. Synthesis, ontological continuity, and the dissolution of the subject. The film's final movement enacts a form of synthesis that is philosophically coherent, yet experientially horrifying. In Hegelian terms, this is Aufhebung without reconciliation, a resolution that preserves truth at the cost of the subject who sought it. The alien consciousness encountered is not external invasion, but ontological recognition. The blood within the protagonist's body and the blood ocean surrounding the vessel are revealed as continuous. The horror lies not in contamination, but in exposure, the revelation that the boundaries sustaining selfhood were always provisional constructs. The transformation of both the vessel and body makes this continuity explicit. Metal warps into organic form, flesh loses its discrete integrity. The wounds of the body are the wounds of the vessel. The wounds of the vessel are the wounds of the body. This is not an annihilation of the body, but a metamorphosis, a transition into participation within a system that always already included the subject. The protagonist does not die so much as cease to be a bounded self. This, according to TMT, represents an absolute failure. Symbolic immortality collapses because there is no longer a stable self to preserve. Cultural meaning dissolves because the categorical distinctions upon which meaning depends, human, alien, life, death, self, other, are rendered inoperative. The alien consciousness is not absence but presence, not void but plenitude. What is horrifying here is not that nothing remains, or that humans may cease to exist, but that something remains that cannot be accommodated within human cognitive architecture. The synthesis resolves the contradictions of bounded subjectivity by abolishing it. Cognitively, this is the ultimate epistemological rupture. Consciousness confronts the truth that the subject-object distinction was a functional illusion generated by predictive systems optimized for survival, not metaphysical accuracy. The instruments that once mediated reality are revealed as components of the same material continuum that they purported to represent. In this manner, acquisition of knowledge collapses into pure participation. Philosophical implications. Cosmic horror as terminal dialectic. Iron Lung demonstrates that cosmic horror operates as a form of terminal dialectic. The movement towards knowledge succeeds, but only by destroying the conditions under which the knowing subject can persist. This is not a failure of dialectics per se, but a failure of human subjectivity to survive its own epistemological trajectory. TMT clarifies why this movement is unbearable. Cultural worldviews and symbolic systems do not merely soften death anxiety. They sustain the illusion of bounded selfhood upon which cognition depends. When those systems fail, consciousness does not merely fear death, it loses coherence. The film's minimalism, then, is thus methodological rather than purely aesthetic. By stripping away narrative complexity and sensory richness, Iron Lung isolates the conditions of consciousness itself. The blood ocean functions as a philosophical proposition rather than a setting, a hyperobject that exposes the fragility of epistemological boundaries and the contingency of selfhood. Horror here is not spectacle, but a method. Iron Lung does not illustrate philosophical ideas, it enacts them. The audience is forced into the same epistemological posture as the protagonist, reliant on partial representations, denied perceptual grounding, compelled to confront the possibility that the self is not foundation, but a fiction, at least for those paying attention. Conclusion. Iron Lung exemplifies horror cinema's capacity to function as a rigorous philosophical inquiry. By staging the collapse of instrumental mastery, terror management, and embodied cognition within a single constrained environment, the film renders abstract epistemological problems experientially unavoidable. Its horror lies not in death, but in recognition, the realization that the boundaries sustaining subjectivity were never as solid as consciousness seems to require them to be, and in this manner, the hope that he attempts to release into the world can never be something in which he, as himself, could ever participate.